When a group of so-called HOA cops showed up at my door claiming I was breaking community rules, I felt a surge of anger mixed with dread. They strutted up with fake badges and an air of entitlement as if they owned the place and tried to arrest me right in my own backyard. Little did they know, I'm an undercover FBI agent, a fact that only deepened the conflict within me. On one hand, I was infuriated by their audacity. On the other, I couldn't help but feel that part of me wondered if this absurd charade was somehow a setup. I've long suspected that the HOA in my neighborhood was nothing more than a band of fanatic eccentrics with too much time and no meaningful purpose. These self-appointed sheriffs believed they were the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong, ready to pounce on anyone who dared defy their ridiculous mandates, whether it was about the height of my hedges, the color of my mailbox, or the way I parked my car. Despite their relentless harassment, I never imagined I'd face such an overt challenge on a quiet morning. I was calmly going over case files at my kitchen table when I noticed a group of people outside, their reflections ghosting past the window. There they were, 4 figures on my sidewalk, each clad in identical polo shirts and sunglasses, projecting a bogus sense of authority as if it were purchased from a discount bin. One clutched a clipboard, another fiddled with a toy walkie-talkie at his waist, and right in the middle stood a woman with short, dyed blonde hair, arms crossed, and an unmistakably sour expression. Karen. She exuded the aura of a self-appointed general, commanding what looked to be an army of misguided fools. Part of me bristled at her audacity, while another part couldn't help but see the absurdity of it all. Taking a deep, conflicted breath, I closed my FBI case folder and moved to answer the door, silently debating whether this was all some elaborate prank. Before I could even open it fully, Karen launched into a speech that sounded more like a staged press conference than a real encounter. "You are in serious violation of HOA rules, and we are here to take action." I stared at her, a mix of incredulity and internal hesitation churning inside me. Was this for real? Or was someone recording a bizarre skit? My thoughts raced as I struggled between the urge to immediately walk away and the duty to stand my ground. Before I could muster any reply, she thrust a piece of plastic into my face. "You are under investigation for numerous infractions," she declared. "These include the unauthorized installation of security cameras, the presence of an unmarked vehicle on your property," and she paused with dramatic flair as if about to level an earth-shattering accusation. "Suspicious activity that threatens the safety of our community." I fought back a laugh while feeling the heavy tug of conflict in my chest. The security cameras were perfectly legal, approved by my bureau supervisor for my cover story. The unmarked vehicle was my FBI-issued sedan, parked right in my own driveway. And as for suspicious activity, that was just my silent refusal to waste time on the meaningless HOA meetings that had plagued my life for too long. Then came the final, almost surreal moment. Because you refused to heed previous warnings, the HOA is exercising its right to civil custody, and we're here to take you into custody until this matter is resolved. In that moment, my inner turmoil surged, a heady blend of indignation, duty, and a deeply personal resentment against the absurdity of it all. Here I was, caught between my undercover profession and a petty suburban tyranny, forced to confront both a ridiculous enemy and my own conflicted sense of justice. Detention? I blinked a few times, trying to absorb what she was saying. "You want to arrest me?" Karen puffed out her chest as if she were about to receive a medal for bravery. "The HOA has full authority over this neighborhood." The other 3 idiots nodded in sync, as if they were a choir of well-trained parrots. And that's when I realized the level of insanity. They really thought they had the power to arrest someone. Little did they know I'm an FBI agent, not a mall security guard, not a neighborhood volunteer. I'm a real federal agent with a badge, gun, and a good dose of patience for this kind of nonsense. I kept my cool and decided to play the game for a moment. "Interesting," I said, feigning consideration. "And how exactly do you intend to arrest me?" Karen pointed to one of the thugs, a man with a beer belly and a polo shirt that looked 2 sizes smaller than it should have been. He pulled a pair of plastic handcuffs from his pocket. Plastic. "We have our methods," he said, trying to sound tough. It was official. The circus was set up on my doorstep. I took a deep breath, stepped back, and in one swift movement pulled my wallet out of my pocket, opening it to display my shiny FBI badge. Karen's smile disappeared faster than a Black Friday discount. "Good to know you think you can make arrests," I said in the most serious voice I could manage. "Because at the moment, you're committing a series of federal crimes, including impersonation of a law enforcement officer and attempted kidnapping." The silence was instantaneous. Karen's eyes widened, her henchmen looked at each other, and for the first time, they realized they had been playing with the wrong person. "What are you implying?" the woman stammered, her confidence crumbling like a house of cards in a gale. I crossed my arms. "I'm implying that unless you disappear from my property in the next 5 seconds, I'm going to arrest you. For real." Silence. Sweat started running down one of the guys' foreheads. Karen's hand trembled slightly as she still clutched the laminated paper, and then, like a bunch of rats fleeing a sinking ship, they began to take steps backwards, mumbling lame excuses. "It's not over yet!" Karen shouted before spinning on her heels and disappearing with her pathetic companions. I watched as they walked away, feeling a mixture of amusement and disbelief. What the hell had just happened? But deep down, I knew this story was far from over. If I thought that ridiculous arrest scene was the end of the joke, I was very much mistaken. I knew stubborn people, but Karen and her henchmen took it to an almost artistic level. Not only did she not give up, she decided to double her bet. The first retaliation came the next day. When I went out to take out the garbage, I realized that my trash cans were gone. They had simply disappeared. There was no sign of them on the sidewalk or on the side of the house. I looked around and of course I saw Karen on the other side of the street, standing with her arms crossed, looking like she thought she was the queen of the neighborhood. When our eyes met, she made sure to let out a satisfied little smile before entering her house. I took a deep breath and tried to ignore it, but then when I got to my mailbox, I found an envelope with the HOA stamp on it. I opened it, knowing that there was going to be crap inside, and I wasn't disappointed. A list of penalties because, according to them, I was in non-compliance with community standards. Among the pearls, they said I was forbidden to use the waste disposal services, could no longer park my car in the driveway, and had to attend a mandatory meeting to discuss my suspicious activities. I took the paper and tore it in half right there, letting the pieces fall to the ground. If Karen wanted to annoy me, she was going to have to try harder. But of course, she had other tricks up her sleeve. That afternoon, I went out to follow up on my actual FBI case, and when I came back, I found an orange cone in the middle of my driveway. Next to it, there was a plastic notice stuck to a piece of wood, as if it were an official notification. It said that my driveway was closed by order of the HOA due to suspicious activities. It was the most absurd thing I've ever seen. How can someone have the nerve to ban someone else from using their own driveway? I went over there, tore off the paper, and unceremoniously threw the cone onto the sidewalk and across the street. I saw two of Karen's cronies watching, one of them holding a notebook, writing down who knows what. Maybe owner removing cone improperly, as if they were serious investigators and not two idiots playing inspectors. It wasn't even 2 minutes before Karen appeared. "You can't remove that!" I looked at her, holding the cone as if it were a murder weapon. "Oh, I can't! In my own house?" She pointed at the laminated paper, her face already turning red with anger. "This is an HOA sanction. You can't just ignore community rules." I took a deep breath so as not to laugh in her face. "Karen, you don't have the authority to ban my driveway. In fact, you have no authority to do anything but annoy me." She widened her eyes in indignation, but before she could reply, I went into the house and slammed the door. But the story wasn't over yet. The next day, while I was at the FBI field office, I got a call from one of the few neighbors who wasn't part of this crazy HOA cult. He sounded a bit nervous. "Dude, the police are in front of your house. 2 cars. They said they'd received a tip about a man with a gun on your property." That's when I understood. Karen had upped her game. She called the police and made up a story to get me in trouble. I took my car and went straight home. When I arrived, I saw the 2 policemen talking to Karen, who was playing her best victim role. Her attitude was that of someone deeply concerned about the safety of the community. If I hadn't known she was a snake, I would have believed it. I got out of the car, and the police recognized me on the spot. I knew them both from interagency cooperation, honest good guys, and I could tell by the look on their faces that they knew they were there for a waste of time. "Oh, Agent," one of them said a little awkwardly, "we've received a report of suspicious activity involving a man with a gun at this residence." I looked straight at Karen. "Bet the report came from this lady here, huh?" She tried to disguise it by putting her hand on her chest. "I only reported what I heard. Some people saw a suspicious movement and got worried." The policemen exchanged glances, already fed up. One of them sighed and turned to me. "Well, since there's no real threat and well, you know who you are, we'll register it as a prank. But miss," he turned to Karen, "just for the record, making false reports can get you into a lot of trouble." Her face turned red. For the first time, she looked really nervous. She opened her mouth to protest, but gave up and just crossed her arms, furious. The policeman left, and I stood there looking at Karen. She looked at me too without saying anything. For the first time, I felt that she really understood she was playing with fire, but I knew she hadn't given up yet. She was going to try something worse, and I couldn't wait to see how far this woman would go before she completely destroyed herself. I already knew that Karen wasn't the type to give up easily, but after the police prank fiasco, anyone with a shred of shame would have stuck their head in a hole and kept quiet. Not this woman. For her, losing was not an option. If the attempt to arrest me with plastic handcuffs and the false complaint didn't work, it was obvious that she had a plan C, and that plan began to appear the very next morning. I was woken up by the sound of a heavy truck pulling up right in front of my house. Still a little groggy, I went to the window and saw a team of uniformed workers getting off the vehicle, equipped with excavators, shovels, and a bunch of orange cones. They looked ready to start some major construction work. My first thought was that they were at the wrong address, but then I saw Karen on the other side of the street with her arms crossed and a satisfied little smile, as if she had just pulled a loose thread and was about to watch my world fall apart. I went downstairs, still in my pajamas, opened the door, and went over to the guys. One of them, who looked like the team leader, turned to me with a clipboard in his hand. "Good morning, sir. We're going to start repairs on the underground pipes." I looked like I didn't understand anything. "What repairs?" "We received a request from the Residents Association informing us that there was a security risk on this property, potential explosives under your lawn." I glanced at Karen, who pretended to be admiring a tree. "Let me guess. The work order was signed by a certain Karen?" The man flipped through the papers and nodded. "Yes, the order came from Karen Thompson, president of the HOA. Karen, that bastard, had called in a bomb threat on my property." I took a deep breath so as not to tell everyone to bleep off at once. "Look, buddy, there are no explosives here. Neither you nor the HOA are authorized to touch anything, so you can gather up your tools and turn around." The guy hesitated, looking at his colleagues as if waiting for some confirmation. "Well, sir, the thing is, we're already here and now you're leaving." He opened his mouth to protest, but then I showed him my FBI badge. The effect was immediate. He widened his eyes, swallowed dryly, and turned to the staff. "Right, guys. Let's call it a day." The workers started collecting the tools, and Karen came marching towards me like a runaway train. "You can't do this," I raised an eyebrow. "What? Stop them from tearing up my yard for a false bomb threat? The HOA has authority over the neighborhood's security concerns, and I have the authority to arrest you for making a false report about explosives. A federal offense." Her mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish out of water. For the first time, she seemed genuinely speechless. But don't worry, the woman recovered quickly. "You're disrespecting the community. That's not how a good neighbor behaves." I took a step forward, lowering my voice just to see the color drain from her face. "And you're meddling in federal matters, Karen. False bomb threats are terrorism charges." Karen didn't reply. She just threw her hands up in the air, huffed, and walked back into the house, stomping on the floor like a tantruming child. But of course, she wasn't going to stop there. The following week, I received a letter from the HOA saying that my house was under disciplinary review and that my behavior was harming the well-being of the community. Basically, it was their fancy way of saying that they were trying to evict me. That's right, this crazy woman wanted me out of my own home. According to the letter, I had accumulated several serious infractions and was openly defying the authority of the HOA. Therefore, my presence was no longer desired, and they were taking steps to revoke my residency in the neighborhood. I had to laugh out loud. The HOA didn't have the slightest power to do that. They didn't own my house, they had no control over the mortgage, and they couldn't just decide that I couldn't live there anymore. But it seemed Karen thought they did. To make matters worse, some of the neighbors began to look down on me, clearly influenced by the smear campaign this woman had mounted against me. From one hour to the next, I had become the neighborhood's public enemy number one, the problematic guy, the rebel who was defying the sacred order of the HOA. It got to such a ridiculous point that one day, when I went to the supermarket, a neighbor who barely spoke to me approached me and said, in the tone of someone who is passing on first-hand gossip, "You know, some people are thinking that you really don't fit in here very well. Maybe you should consider moving." I gave a fake smile. "Some people should worry more about their own lives." She blushed and slipped out. This disciplinary meeting was scheduled for a Friday evening. I went just for the pleasure of seeing Karen fail live. The community room was full, the neighbors sitting in chairs lined up like a courtroom. Karen was there at the front with a pile of papers on the table, clearly ready to publicly execute me. She sniffed and began to speak with that tone of a kindergarten teacher explaining rules to children. "We're here to discuss the highly problematic behavior of the gentleman who refuses to cooperate with the community." I rolled my eyes. "Cut the bleep, Karen. Do you want to kick me out of the neighborhood?" She tried to disguise it, but the truth was obvious. Well, considering the number of offenses accumulated, I leaned forward. "What offenses exactly? Forged arrest attempts? Calling in a false bomb threat? Harassing a federal agent? Those are all federal crimes, by the way." She turned red but tried to continue. "The point is," I raised my hand, interrupting, "the point is that the HOA has no power to remove anyone from here. This isn't a gated community, Karen. You're not the sheriff, and this meeting means absolutely nothing." The silence was absolute. Some neighbors looked at each other as if realizing this for the first time. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and then tried to laugh as if it was nothing. "This is absurd. You simply don't fit into our community." I crossed my arms. "Yeah, I think I'm going to continue not fitting in because I'm not going anywhere. And by the way," I pulled out my FBI credentials again, "I'm here on an official investigation and you've been interfering with federal business this entire time." She stared at me, her face on fire with anger, but she knew she had lost. Except Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted losing, and I knew she still had one last dirty trick up her sleeve. I'd seen Karen try to arrest me, call in a bomb threat, accuse me of false crimes, and even try to kick me out of my own neighborhood. Every time I thought she'd reached the edge of madness, she'd find a way to outdo herself. And after the public humiliation she took at the HOA meeting, I knew this woman was going to come with everything. And she did. This time it wasn't a ridiculous letter, a cone in my driveway, or a false report. This time, Karen decided to play dirty for real. The week after the meeting, I woke up to the unpleasant sound of sirens outside my house. I glanced out of the window and, to my surprise, saw 2 Homeland Security vehicles parked outside. And of course, on the other side of the street, there she was, pretending she was just observing the scene, but with the same satisfied look as always. Karen had called Homeland Security on me. I went downstairs and opened the door before the agents even knocked. One of them, a serious-looking man with a folder in his hand, looked at me with an air of forced professionalism and got straight to the point. "Sir, we've received a report about suspicious activities that may constitute a national security threat. We're going to need to carry out a full search of the premises." I looked confused. "National security threat?" "Yes, according to the report, this residence has been identified as a potential terrorist safe house with possible connections to international terrorist organizations." Now I wanted to laugh. Karen was no longer playing games just to annoy me. She was trying to get me labeled as a terrorist. I leaned against the doorframe, looking at the agent. "And who made this complaint?" The guy hesitated for a moment before answering. "Well, we received an anonymous tip through our hotline." "Of course it was anonymous," I said, pulling out my FBI credentials. "I'm Special Agent Jackson, currently working undercover on a federal investigation in this neighborhood. My field office can confirm my identity." The agent's eyes widened as he examined my credentials. He stepped back and conferred with his colleague in hushed tones. Meanwhile, I could see Karen shifting nervously across the street. After a brief phone call to verify my identity, the lead agent returned. His demeanor completely changed. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Agent Jackson. It appears this was a false report." "Yes, and I believe I know exactly who made it," I said, nodding toward Karen, who was now trying to discreetly walk back to her house. "That woman across the street has been harassing me since I moved in as part of my cover. She's also filed false police reports and even called in a fake bomb threat." The Homeland Security agents exchanged concerned glances. "Making false reports to Homeland Security is a federal offense," one of them said. "I'm aware," I replied, "and I think it's time we put an end to this." I went across the street with the agents following behind me. Karen froze when she saw us approaching. The color drained from her face. "Karen Thompson?" one of the agents asked. Yes," she stammered. "We need to ask you some questions about the report made to Homeland Security regarding your neighbor." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking. I stepped forward. "Karen, the call was traced to your phone. Making false reports to federal agencies is a serious crime." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," the agent said firmly. As they escorted Karen to their vehicle, I could see the neighbors watching from their windows and doorways. The HOA queen was finally facing real consequences. The following days brought a whirlwind of disorder to the neighborhood, leaving me torn between disbelief and a reluctant satisfaction. News of Karen's arrest spread like wildfire, and suddenly, whispers of her misdeeds filled every corner. It turned out that she had been levying unjust fines on residents simply to bankroll what she called the association's important events, which in reality were nothing more than lavish parties for her and her inner circle. Worse yet, she hired dubious contractors to maintain common areas and funneled some of the funds into her own pockets. As if that weren't enough, the ultimate irony revealed itself. Karen hadn't even been entitled to lead our HOA. Our rules dictated that any office holder was subject to an annual re-election, yet she conveniently ignored this requirement. Her grip on power had continued purely because no one seemed willing to challenge her, at least until this point, when anger and betrayal mingled with a hint of vindication. A special meeting was hastily convened to determine the HOA's future, but even as I prepared to participate, I felt a deep sense of conflict. Karen's staunch supporters were nowhere to be seen, leaving a residue of disappointment amid the growing fury over our collective deception. Those who'd once rallied behind her were now stepping back, perhaps realizing they too were pawns in her grand illusion, a thought that left me both saddened and relieved. The situation took an even darker turn when a federal investigation into the HOA's finances was launched. An auditor's shocking revelation, over $50,000 missing, added fuel to the fire, raising the possibility of additional charges against Karen. It was hard not to feel a conflicted mix of justice finally being served and the bitter regret of how far our community had fallen. Ultimately, Karen faced multiple federal charges for filing false reports with law enforcement, misusing emergency services, attempted fraud, and embezzlement. When the real handcuffs were finally locked onto her wrists for the second time, I couldn't ignore the ironic applause from a resident shouting, "Well done!" It was a moment tinged with satisfaction, yet marred by the realization of all the betrayal that had led to this point. The self-proclaimed dictator of our neighborhood was led away like a hardened criminal. In the wake of her departure, our HOA underwent a dramatic transformation. Rules were reformed, unjust fines were canceled, and a new board emerged with the intention of preventing such concentration of power ever again. Yet even amid these changes, I couldn't shake the internal conflict of celebrating the end of a reign while mourning the breakdown of trust that had taken so long to repair. What added a peculiar twist to the aftermath was discovering weeks later that Karen's appeals in court were fruitless. Forced to sell her house and leave town, she headed off to a place where no one knew her, perhaps scheming to start anew. Although a part of me relished the thought of her empire crumbling, another part mourned the loss of a community once united, albeit under false pretenses. Now, as peace finally returns to our streets, There's a paradoxical comfort in seeing that "for sale" sign down the block. I managed to wrap up my investigation successfully, albeit with far more neighborhood drama and personal inner turmoil than anyone, not even the FBI, could have imagined. Did you like this video? Then don't forget to subscribe to the channel.